the slides and the web chat will also be available online at www.learningandskillsgroup.com. Please do come and join us. It's a community of over 6,000 individuals, all in the learning and development space, and it's great to have you as part of the community. It's free, and I don't think you don't get hit by anything as a result of being signed up. During the course of these sessions, we do use sound from the speakers of the computer, and the dial-in details are there. I'm going to put them in the text chat area for the moment, just in case there's an issue with sound. We had some people needing to dial in earlier on. We also use a great deal of chat, so please do contribute in the chat area. I know that Toby and Nick will be asking questions, so please feel free to answer those questions when they come up, and to give, as always, your thought in the chat area. We do like to build on each other's thoughts and be part of a collaborative community, I think I can safely say. Plenty of people were tweeting last time, this morning, on Twitter, using hash LSG Webinar to identify the session. Please do so before, well, you can't do it before now, unless you do it immediately, but certainly during and after, if you enjoy it. Let the world know what you've learned at your session today. But that's enough from me. I'm going to hand you over now to our speakers for today, Toby Harris and Nick Baum of Saffron Interactive, who are going to be taking us through the business of how you can build and support resilience through e-learning. Toby and Nick, just to let you know, you can use the arrows at the bottom there, or you can scroll down to move from slide to slide in your PDF presentation. Over to you guys.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Don. I'm just trying to find where those arrows are in the room I've got open. Hold on. Yes, I seem to be having a bit of an issue here. Okay, there we are. Sorry about that. So, to begin, so we're going to be talking about something that we feel is very important in terms of building and supporting resilience through e-learning. But we're going to set that in a broader context of really how we think that learning needs to change in very difficult times where we're asking a lot more of individual employees, and it's vital to build that emotional investment. And to do that, we need to create learning that really relates to individual learners, and that's why we've got our subtitle, Why Emotional Outcomes Matter Just as Much as Learning Outcomes. So what we're going to be talking about today is a pedagogical approach to e-learning, and we're going to use the hugely successful work that we've done with Transport for London in the area of mental resilience in order to illustrate how that works. So your presenters, and apologies we don't have Dan Church with us. So I'm Toby, I'm creative lead at Saffron, and I'm joined by Nick, who is the senior instruction designer who is heavily involved on this course. So this is really our first question to throw out to everyone. Do you think that e-learning can ever be more effective than classroom training when it comes to tough topics like mental resilience?
That's a good question. Toby, and it's a rather challenging one, because you're not just saying can it be as good as classroom, you're saying can it be more effective than classroom on
Indeed.
topics like mental resilience. I'd be interested to see how people react to this idea. A few answers coming through already. Let's not prejudge. We may have a bit of fence sitting going on. Possibly, not sure, but Marco says, in isolation, no, e-learning can't do it. As a blended solution, Peter is asking a question, would it be facilitated e-learning in some way? I think that's a fair question. Do you want to expand on that at all, Toby?
Absolutely. So by facilitated, I suppose Peter means that there needs to be some contextual stuff around it. You're not just giving people an e-learning course and telling them to run with it. And I think it needs to be framed properly. It needs to be promoted properly. But I believe that there's a real value in e-learning being used on topics like mental resilience because it's not facilitated, because you're not being asked to actually stand up in front of other people and admit, say, you had a serious problem with clinical depression, for example. That's a very difficult thing to do in the context of someone else. And in terms of the typical people who deliver training, it's not suitable at all. When we talk about resilience, we talk about one-to-one mentoring mainly. So as a broad brush approach, I think that there's a lot to be said for the privacy of an e-learning course to convey these resilience techniques, because you're breaking down that actual barrier that facilitation can throw up.
Lots of questions, of course, being thrown up here. Some saying, well, can you define resilience, please? Can you define e-learning, and so on? I mean, Henrik says, look, e-learning could be reading a book on a Kindle. I mean, obviously, there are lots of things about here where we could drill down into it in more detail, but I do think that it's a good question to challenge us to begin with. Can it be more effective? Toby's going to, I think, take us through, Toby and Nick will take us through some thoughts where they believe possibly it can. Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. So the first thing we want to do is talk about the context for this intervention for learning and development professionals generally, and for the kind of environment in which our pedagogical technique is most applicable. So if we look at the businesses that have folded in the past 2 years, there's a lot of high street names there. This is difficult times for organisations and for employees. So they need to change to survive. Business change is absolutely crucial. And where does learning fit into that? So by change we mean adapting to new systems, or importantly becoming more resilient. And where does learning fit into that? Well, we think it fits in here when we're talking about employee engagement. And by employee engagement, we mean employees who are emotionally invested in their organization's goals and aspirations. Now, these employees are rather special. 88% of emotionally engaged employees believe that they can positively impact quality, compared with only 38% of the disengaged. 68% of emotionally engaged employees believe they can positively impact costs, and that's compared with just 19% of the disengaged. Now, things positively impacting costs in difficult times is not something we'd often attribute to the agency of individual employees.
Toby, questions come up, which I think is a fair one to ask at this stage. What do you mean by emotionally engaged?
Yeah, and that really drills down into the heart of what we're talking about here. In a very fundamental sense, we mean learners whose own aspirations for self-realization, for personal improvement, whose own goals are aligned with the goals of the organization. So really, it's that sense of belonging. Do you think that's a good answer?
Well, it's a good answer for me. I'd like to know if there's, if Alan thinks it's a good answer. He raised the question, and Jane has asked the question: is it a chicken and egg situation though? Are people engaged because they know they can make an impact? In other words, is it are these two factors strongly correlated rather than independent?
I think that's certainly a very interesting point. I think the ability for employees to know that what the decisions they make will have an impact is going to be a positive multiplier in terms of engagement. It's kind of outside of the scope of really what we can accomplish with an individual e-learning course, but I think it's a very good point.
And Marco's raised the point about John Lewis. If you could expand on that, Marco, that would be great. But anyway, sorry, back to you, Toby.
That's an interesting point about employee ownership schemes. Yeah, that's a really concrete sense of ownership there. And the results show, this is the Blessing White Employee Engagement Report of 2011, that only 31% of employees are actively engaged in their jobs. So they are emotionally invested in realizing the goals of their organization on a day-to-day basis, rather than just trying to kind of get by and do what's expected of them. So this is a challenge that we need to address, and it's a challenge of engagement with any kind of change program, including resilience. And it's a challenge that we feel that e-learning needs to address in ways that it hasn't been viewed possible to address, I suppose. So we wanted to look back and think again about what really motivates learners, what motivates emotional investment, and why do people behave like the way they do. And we drew upon fairly recent, not that recent, but emerging kind of aspect of economics, just behaviour economics. And that has found really that humans are motivated primarily by intrinsic factors. So rather than extrinsic factors such as a pay rise or promotion, employees are motivated by things that are kind of happen internally. So those are things like peer comparison. Bankers always want to earn more money because other bankers are earning more money rather than the value of the money itself. Another key factor is the framing effect. So when something happens to us, we kind of sift back through the anecdotes, the stories, and the stereotypes that we have, and then see which one applies most to that particular situation. So this is called the framing effect. And finally, there's the endowment effect. Now, this is the idea that as soon as we feel that something belongs to us, it takes on a much higher value. We're overly risk averse, which means that we will literally put a higher dollar value on a coffee cup if it was given to us 5 minutes before and told it belonged to us than one which wasn't given to us 5 minutes before. So this endowment effect is very important, the sense that this belongs to me and I belong to this. And it kind of boils down to that very kind of tribal sense. And again, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about engagement, because an emotionally engaged employee feels they have something to lose, you know, if they are not accomplishing their organization's goals. And so we think that learning and learning technologies need to change to accommodate for these intrinsic motivators for behavior, that the incentives that have been set up, aspects of gamification, badges and things like that, are maybe looking at things in a superficial way on the surface, but aren't drilling down into the kind of deep motivations and understanding why learners are going to take on ownership of the behaviors that you want them to adopt. And I've got a comment from Peter as well, to kick back that peer is still extrinsic. So yeah, we would define an intrinsic motivator as effectively one that is not related to the kind of things that are external to the way we feel. So because we still feel and have emotions about our peers, we'd still say that's an intrinsic motivator. Anything that you might sit up at night worrying about, I suppose. So we think there's three dynamics to learning which accomplishes that kind of self-realization in learning and that kind of motivation, and that those are really, really linked to how like something difficult like resilience and do the impossible, make more of an impact than we could with Classroom. So the first is to leverage the idea of peer comparison and of community by using diagnostics which involve the learner and show them where they are in relation to others. Now, interestingly, it's not actually about comparing learners directly with other people. To compare a diagnostic someone had filled in on how resilient they were with others would be grotesquely unethical. What we're talking about is comparison with an imagined other, comparison with themselves. As soon as you can show people that they're not doing so well in a particular category, they want to improve in that category, they become invested in it. The second element is through storytelling and through relatable scenarios. And we think this is incredibly important because actual stories based on real case studies are the kind of things which will alter the cognitive frames that people use to make decisions. And finally, we want to be able to capture the endowment effect. And that's why we feel that we need tailored action plans that truly belong to the learner. So it's not about giving the learner an action plan and telling them, do these 5 things. It's a false sense of security because it almost guarantees they probably won't do those 5 things. Whereas if they choose to do those things, then we're leveraging the endowment effect and that sense of belonging. So I'm going to hand over to, I'm sure you're keen to kind of see how does this work in practice, what kind of results can you achieve with that. And so before we jump into the resilience case study, I'm going to introduce Nick to talk about this in relation to a sustainability course for Balfour Beatty. And so I'm going to pass over to Nick now.
Hi all. As Toby's introduced me, it's my role on this call to take the place of Dan and just talk a little bit more about how we're putting this into practice. And just as a preamble really before we get into the meat of the presentation with TfL, we wanted to talk about how we first piloted this approach a few years ago. We were working with Balfour Beatty to produce a sustainability course. And now, I don't know if any of you on call know anything about Balfour Beatty, but they're made up of numerous highly independent opcos. There was only over 26 at this point in time, and that's grown now to over 50. Each of them had their own messaging around sustainability, and so it was really important that we gained a sense of emotional buy-in for each of those operating companies and the employees within them to grow sustainability from the grassroots and to develop an approach that was bottom-up, so from the ground floor, from cleaners working in Balfour Beatty's offices, right up to board level. Everybody was motivated and everybody was reading from the same page to contribute towards sustainability at Balfour Beatty. Balfour Beatty had what they called their 2020 vision, as a lot of companies share, and a list of targets that they needed to deliver in order to show that they were a sustainable business and that they were taking their social responsibility, they were taking that with the appropriate seriousness. So we wanted to get buy-in, we wanted to win hearts and minds. And so what we designed were scenarios that introduced hypothetical situations that were tailored to areas of expertise for each employee working at Balfour Beatty. Now, taking this course, I'm presented with situations that I could find myself in my day-to-day role. And I'm challenged, based on the responses that I can give, to find the appropriate response that will balance the key considerations of sustainability, because it's not about right or wrong answers. We sometimes wish it were, because it would make designing them a lot easier. But it's about striking the balance between the 3 areas of sustainability. That's profitable markets, social sustainability, so communities that you operate in, and also the environmental considerations as well that go along with that. And so the feedback that we gave was to show this balance, to make people see where they were in comparison to an ideal response, the Balfour Beatty way, and the considerations that would need to be balanced for them to get there. But for this, we really wanted to drive some kind of key output, because for us, it's all about generating behaviour that will contribute to change, and to deliver an effect that Balfour Beatty can measure on their bottom line. And so, at the end of this course, learners could choose to make a commitment to one or more of 30 individual actions that were tailored to them and form part of their individual action plan that they could use, that they could take away, and that they could demonstrate their commitment to sustainability with. Now, this was meant to be a surprise that we revealed to you in terms of the statistics there, but as you can see, they're on screen. That in the first 6 months, we had 10,000 users complete this course. And what we found that we had were 28,000 commitments made, which was an overwhelming response. And that's really grown and grown since that first 6 months rollout. Those objectives were all linked to the learning within the course, to profitable markets, healthy communities, and environmental sustainability, and also tailored to individual job role too. So how then do we take this original approach and apply it to mental resilience, which is a very different topic entirely? Well, for Transport for London, this was replacing a classroom session that they had, and we were aware that mental resilience is often a taboo topic. People don't like to speak about mental health issues, and unfortunately there's a perception, a negative perception towards mental health issues in society. So we were challenged to develop a solution of how to manage, or how learners could manage pressure, both in their personal and professional lives, that would deliver an end result of improving the mental health and resilience of employees. It also cut paid absence due to mental difficulties. And I think it's important to consider as well as we look at this, that this is a non-mandatory course. Bad e-learning often kind of hides behind the fact that it is mandatory training and it's required by compliance, but this was something that people could take voluntarily. So imagine that you're a TfL employee. I don't know if we want to get some thoughts at this point as to what people think the challenges might be day to day.
That's a really good idea. What's it like to be a Transport for London employee? What does it feel like when you're, well, there you are, manning the desks, going through? That's one thing you can be doing, looking at the turnstiles. You can be serving people tickets. Oh, and we've had a comment come up already.
Public abuse, that's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I travel on the tube all the time. It's very sad that they have to put posters up saying don't abuse our staff, but I'm afraid that people seem to be absolutely hitting the nail on the head here, don't they, guys?
Yeah, I've seen some terrible stuff. Highbury and Islington, Victoria Line.
Yeah, I mean, I think the overwhelming response that we're getting from everybody is that it's a very pressured environment. Everybody who's travelling on the tube is in a rush to get somewhere. Everybody is always looking to cut down their morning commute and to shave 5 minutes off here and there. So when that time's added on, it creates stress to the customer, and that stress, unfortunately, is passed on to employees at TfL as representatives of the customer. So for TfL as an organisation, it's not just station staff, it includes overground staff, cross-rail staff, staff that are in place to manage the congestion charge, everybody that's responsible for keeping London moving. And it's from boots on the ground to senior executives. They have a very diverse workforce with a diverse customer base and endless change to cope with. So Crossrail really is a major project that's going across London for the next 15 years, I think. Maybe probably longer than that. So they're managing that as well as keeping London moving on a really archaic system. Some parts that are needed to be made to order every time something fails because it's based on 20s infrastructure. And the downside of that is that sometimes stress of customers results in assaults on staff, injuries suffered just as an occupational hazard working in rail station. And it's one of the most stressful and difficult jobs in Europe. Coupled with this, when we were rolling out the course, TfL were heavily involved in planning up to the Olympics and how they would keep London moving when we had millions of people coming to the capital and looking to get around while they were here. So there's 27,000 TfL staff that are responsible for delivering 4 million customer journeys every day. And that's just 7,000 employees on the tube as well. And those people have a daily impact on the lives of 4 million others. So really, the mental resilience of the transport system is a metonym for the mental resilience of London as a whole. And the well-being of the people who run the complex system that is the Underground does affect everybody who's dialing in from London today and who has got to the office by tube or bus or rail. In terms of the scale and effects of mental health problems, at TfL, 15 to 20% of all sickness, absence and medical retirements are due to mental health issues. And it's a huge cost for any organisation to have that, as I'm sure many of you may experience in yours. And that's why we were specifically targeting this to really look at reducing that.
Just a quick question to put out to people. Does anyone in their organisations measure the effect of mental health problems in terms of sickness, absence and medical retirements? Is that something that can people relate to this figure? Do they think that's the kind of thing that is the case typically?
That's a very good question. I'd like to know whether you do it. Also, Toby, can you give us some insight as to how Transport for London do this?
Yes, so Transport for London actually do record the reasons for a sickness absence and the reason for medical retirement in a way which is quite enlightened. I can't go into much further detail about their data gathering methods due to client confidentiality, and it is quite a sensitive subject, but what I can say is that we were lucky enough as an e-learning vendor to be able to share this information because it's something that most organisations simply would not disclose.
It's interesting seeing the response of people. Alan saying, no, we don't do it, but perhaps we should. And Jane points out it does seem very high, but perhaps not given some of the stresses that we've just been talking about. Tracy points out that they do record the cause of absence by general headings, and in her case they're a bit different. In financial services, there's a high volume of stress-related absences, as I can imagine there would be.
It's really interesting to see the responses that we're getting. And how that correlates to TfL staff in terms of the figures is that if we take that as 1 in 4 people are affected by mental health illnesses every year, which is a nationally recognised statistic, then that probably equates to about 7,000 TfL staff every year that suffer some kind of mental health problem. And the impact on the organisation is that they've calculated that 1 day's absence for any reason is a cost to the business of £290. And that's in getting temporary cover and ensuring that overtime can be sufficiently covered to make sure that the service still runs because the trains have to keep running. And that doesn't include the cost of any station closes due to the lack of staff or trains not running if they can't get enough staff. So the cost of the business is potentially more than £290, but that's what we've taken as the baseline figure. So a challenge from the outset was to try and get people to engage with mental resilience, to get people talking about mental health and to make it a subject that wasn't taboo anymore. And it'd be good to know if anybody has any ideas, perhaps things that they've been doing in their own organisation to respond to this before we talk a little bit about what we've done and the results that we got.
And Toby, presumably you're talking about engaging with this topic either face-to-face or online or anyway.
In any way, yeah. How do you get people to talk about it?
Yeah.
I mean, just to add to the discussion, one way I've seen recently in one of the audit firms is to change the language that we use to talk. So we talk about being kind of like fighting fit. So to use the language of physical fitness rather than mental fitness, which in those kind of vocabulary, which can create very different feelings, is one way to get people to feel able to talk about it.
Okay. So to bring this back to the dynamic that we introduced at the start and how we piloted an approach with Balfour Beatty, what we wanted to do was to show learners where they were and where they could be. So at the outset of the course, we had a resilience questionnaire. And it was a matrix that was put together in conjunction with an occupational health psychiatrist at TfL. And we put together a list of 24 statements that were asked to learners at the start of the course. And asked them to give frank and honest answers. They weren't being stored or kept. They were only for the purpose of the course and for them to see where they were and where they could be, so that they could gain a sense of their current state in terms of mental resilience and what they could do to improve, where that other lay, and what they could do to strengthen. Now, you could be honest with yourself because there was no sense of formal assessment, but how this mapped was that this was correlated against a resilience matrix. So each of those 24 statements were grouped according to whether they were tapping your inner strength, harnessing your thinking, applying yourself, and the others that you can see there. And this was done to highlight areas for improvement and for learners to gain a sense of focus, what they needed to do to improve, to gain a kind of sense of perspective, and give them a frank assessment of their own mental resilience. This then goes on to tailor the rest of the learning and informs the interactions that the learner receives. So it's a challenging question that we wanted to kind of pose to the group. What is it that we actually design e-learning interactions for? I'd be interested to get everybody's thoughts on this. Toby, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, so the question really is, when you have a learner sitting in front of an online course and you're posing them a question, what are you trying to achieve?
It's an excellent question. I think very often we insert interaction, I shouldn't say for the sake of it, but almost because we feel we should. I'd be interested to get people's feedback here. And Anna's saying, keep the user involved and awake. Hopefully they're not in danger of falling asleep, although goodness knows I've done classroom courses where people have fallen asleep, I have to say. Lots of good thoughts coming here, guys. Yeah. What do you think?
I think definitely Stephanie's point about encouraging them to think and reflect is pretty key, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's what we really designed this course around. The ethos that the point of on-screen interaction is to encourage off-screen reflection, and to take what you're seeing on screen and apply it to yourself, to your day-to-day role, and to change your behaviour based on that model and based on the feedback that you're receiving. So we're not just testing your ability to tick a box within a digital program. What we're doing is getting you to think about the decisions you make every day, and not just what they mean to the organisation, but for you on a personal level, and to get your personal reflection, your personal buy-in. And we want to encourage a kind of, and set up an environment where users are free to fail, and see the consequences of their actions, so that they're able to be corrected and they know where they should be going to be steered to a more positive outcome. And these scenarios were all designed around kind of anonymized case studies that we gleaned from TfL and from real issues that were faced by members of staff. And so the idea was that from taking this course, we can't cover every base in terms of all the outcomes or all the scenarios and situations that learners are presented with. But what we can do is create something that encourages empathy and encourages projection. And that's why we developed this line-drawn aesthetic as well, to encourage people to identify not with photographic characters on screen and cut out glossy images, but to actually push their imagination onto it and get them thinking about what it is that it meant for them.
And I think the point made by P. Hughes as well, not testing, what's the point unless you are closely monitoring the results, is a really good point. On a soft skills topic, why are we interested in testing? Can you frame the key points of communicating with someone else? That has very little to do with what they're going to do after they've finished that course. E-learning interactions that test short-term memory provide the same false sense of control that an e-learning output, which is an action plan which you're telling people to do, does, in that they're not impacting behaviour. The real point is off-screen reflection. So it's not, I often use the word, it's not about winning the game of the course, which is what most learners do. They see it as a game environment. They want to get the progress bar to the end. They want to complete the interaction successfully. We need to design out of that model by providing stories and case studies that people can actually engage with, because really we don't want them to be stuck like eyes glued to the screen thinking, what am I going to click on next? We want them to, as many people have said, step back and critically reflect, because that's the only real kind of possibility we have of altering the kind of cognitive frames, that are going to impact the decisions they actually take.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Toby. And in terms of our design and how we supported that, what we've done is to we've shown the learners the path of where they need to go and how they can improve. We've given them content to drive that improvement within the course. But what we also needed to do was to support that learning outside of the course and to turn 45 minutes of learning into 45 weeks of continuous action and improvement. So at the output of each unit, learners were able to build their resilience basket. I know there might be some groans from people on call, but this was really to show that mental resilience and building a mental resilience could be done on a day-to-day level, and that mental health was an everyday topic, and that the output that you could get was very useful, and that this behavioural takeaway could support your personal development and could help you outside of the course to build your mental resilience and support the areas that you'd highlighted for improvement. So at the end of this course, each learner comes away with a set number of tips that they've built themselves that's tailored to them personally, and that's how we could ensure that we delivered a solution that went out to 24,000 people, but was individual and specific for each learner who was taking the course. And so what we did was then to work with TfL to look at the results that they were getting from this course and to measure the success. What we found after the rollout, I think, Toby, this was 9 months after the rollout that we compiled these figures, but we found that 80% of learners enjoyed taking the course and felt that it was a valuable investment of their time. So that's good for us. We know that we're generating engaging solutions, but so what's the point unless we delivered something else? What we also found was that 76% of people had applied the suggestions and techniques recommended for building resilience that they'd generated using their resilience basket, and they were applying those to their day-to-day life and using those to build their mental resilience. And that was straight after they'd taken the course as well. So from day one, we had 76% of people using their resilience basket, and 9 months on, 70% of people who developed a resilience basket were still continuing to use those items on a day-to-day basis. So that they're taking the learning and they're using it to support their personal growth.
Okay, so that's the qualitative stuff in terms of results. But what is really interesting about this, as Don has said, results to come, here they are, is obviously the figures, the quantitative results. So again, it's very unusual for clients to allow us to go back and measure the impacts in this kind of way. This is why real cases of proving return on investment from e-learning interventions in these kind of difficult areas are quite rare, but we were able to do that. So we were able to go back and look at the figures 12 months on. So absenteeism due to mental health issues had reduced by an average of 1 day per worker. Now, that doesn't sound like an awful lot of difference, but over 27,000 employees, that is a lot of money saved. There's £7.83 million saved. Now, how did this come about? I mean, you can look at it in the sense, you know, quantitatively there was a very small shift to behaviour translated on a large scale. But I think that the impact here, the most important impact, is one of culture and one of actually breaking down the kind of taboos around mental health which were preventing people from talking about it. Because if we think about the action plans, you know, the points that are recommended, well, they weren't just be more mentally resilient, don't become depressed. Often they were just telling people to use the resources in place. In the diagnostic that they take in the beginning and at the end of the course, each of those areas links directly to the intranet with support materials. So we're not saying that an e-learning course on mental resilience can prevent or directly kind of boost mental resilience. What we're saying is that it can do two things. It can shift culture and it can give people a pathway in order to access the kind of help and materials they need to step in early, to basically address issues before it results in a crash, which is very damaging long-term to the individual and financially to the organisation as well. We've also got a quick graph here as well to show the kind of detail that we went in, and it's very important to allow yourself 12 to 18 months to measure the effects of an e-learning or any really learning intervention a program around something like this, because you know there are lots of intervening variables that affect something like mental health. And so if we look at a trend line over a long term, then we can see the difference that's being made. So I think it's, again, it's very, very important to do that. And it's also very, very important to get more qualitative information to actually structure the kind of quantitative data that you're going to get. Because numbers will only tell you so much. In this case, they tell us that TFL saved an awful lot of money. But why did they save an awful lot of money? Well, we only really know that by asking learners individually and getting that information. So this is key. I found a shift work section particularly useful, as I don't normally work shifts, but I will during the Olympics. So there we were giving techniques on coping with shift work that wouldn't have been disseminated to such a wide audience before. Here, the course is worth doing because you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's quite a nice comment. I'm sure there's no pun intended there. And this is key as well. I will return to the course regularly to improve my professional resilience. And if we look at what we've done here by doing the unthinkable, by actually trying to put this tough topic of mental resilience into an e-learning course, we've taken a classroom session that happened once a month and could only accommodate 12 people in each of those sessions, and we've made it available to nearly 24,000 people. So we've actually taken that content and we've found a way to get it out to people, and we've done it effectively because we've used a pedagogy that allowed the output of that to be much more tailored than an e-learning course typically would be. So I'm going to move on to the next kind of question here, but I'm also going to allow some space for kind of discussion about that. I can see the chat window is kind of buzzing, so I can let Don, if you want to kind of pick out anything in particular.
Well, the big question that's going on right now, of course, is what about other variables? So what we're looking at is what's the Con in particular from Costas from Australia is asking, can we be sure that learning or that the course was the only or the major factor in making this change? Suppose there was a change in management, did other factors take place, and so on. So what was it that so could we just go back to the slide with the calculation on absenteeism being reduced and the numbers that come out of it? Now, I don't know, I won't ask you how much they invested in the course, but I'm assuming it was a lot less than £1 million.
Yes, an awful lot less than £7 million, definitely.
Right, so let's say it's less than £700,000. So absenteeism has reduced by 1 day per worker. Would they still have made a return on investment if it had reduced by 1/10 of that, by less than 1 hour per day? If, in other words, if they'd saved themselves £700,000, would it still have saved them money?
That would have still represented, I believe, if I add it up right, a 1,000% return on investment, so well over 10 times what the actual investment, and it is an investment that's quite substantial to develop this kind of content, investment of time and effort.
In terms of ROI, I think in terms of ROI, it's a very good point to make, because yes, they've made cost savings by not doing this in the classroom. If they've reduced classroom costs, that's fine. That's not ROI. ROI is when you get something extra out of it, which you have done if you've reduced absenteeism. So the question is, absenteeism was reduced by 1 day per worker. Do we believe, for me, in asking this question, do we believe that, let's say they work an 8-hour shift typically, that 1/8, so that's 1 hour of a day, that 1/8 of the overall effect can be attributed to this course?
I believe that it can do, and I think the evidence of that is twofold. Firstly, when this course went out, it replaced the classroom session. Therefore, within an overall program of physical well-being, this was the only issue targeted at those gnarly mental health issues. So this is the only intervention targeted there. And secondly, it's about the qualitative feedback. I have spoken to many people who've worked for TFL in that period, and they've spoken about how there was this change. You know, because the things in the action plan were often social as well. You know, so it's about talk to your friend, reflect on how a colleague might have dealt with a situation. And so even the people who didn't do the course were impacted by this, because we were spreading a kind of cultural change. It's the idea of taking the e-learning course and making it more of a viral campaign, and that's how you can have a ripple a lot bigger than the splash of the people who actually complete it.
Not splash, I like that. So I like that. I think the anecdotal stuff in combination with the numbers is good. Just drilling down on the numbers, I suppose the other thing that would really make it for me would be seeing that year, those 12 months, compared against the previous 12 months and the previous 12 months before that, to see if there's any seasonal effect, or whether the starting point, whether the trend line beforehand was in some way abnormal. But frankly, I'm willing to take it. I've seen an awful lot of bad ROI calculations. That one has such a large margin that even if the training course is not even the majority of it, even if it's only 1/8 of the absenteeism reduction, they're still making money on it. And I think that's the point. You know, we will never know what all the factors are, but for me, this is enough of a factor to say, you know, I can't believe it had no effect, and even if it had a small one, looks like they're in the money. So fair play.
And it's about getting people to that stage and getting organisations to that stage and finding the appropriate way for the organisation to measure the effect that resilience has on the bottom line as well, because people can approach it in different ways, and one of the ways to approach it is looking at two different scenarios of one person who gets no support and one person who gets some support, and someone in a situation where it's a kind of, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Because for the latter scenario, a serious mental health problem results in an immediate cost because that person loses their job.
Well, I mean, I've worked in organisations where people
Yeah.
in exactly that sort of organisation, people have heart attacks, not kidding, and that's a very serious cost to everybody.
Yeah.
So a couple of comments coming up about the whole ROI piece. I mean, people saying, look, never mind about the ROI as a whole, ignore the money. The organisation has a workforce which is more resilient and has the ability, interestingly, to recognise and support others. So, as you say, not going for the splash, but going for the ripple, which I very much like as a metaphor. Ali says, I believe it could be attributed to the e-learning solution. People had ownership of their learning and could access the information they might not have thought about before. So they're starting from a base of zero in their knowledge. And I think Stuart did raise a good point. Have the reduced absenteeism rates been maintained longer term? So we've got these downward trends here. Do those trends continue, or have they bottomed off? Do we know what the position now is?
And this is the point at which we need to have Dan Church in here as well, really, don't we? So I think definitely we are looking actively at the results of this and measuring the long-term impact in the work we continue to do with TfL. So I think that I think everyone who participates would be interested to see how this has panned out over the year of 2013, absolutely, as well as the previous year.
Love to see the continuing data going forward. And Teresa again is talking here about the ripple, not the splash. It may be the new e-learning course triggered managers to manage better. But to my mind, that's still an effect of the course. And I think this is a really good point, that you can have this wider effect than just the people attending it. Almost you can have a cultural change significant enough that people now talk about these issues in a different way. What was taboo now becomes something you can talk about. Well, that's a magnificent effect. Hawthorne effect, asks WL, meaning, of course, the effect where people change their behaviour as a result simply of being measured. But I'm not sure that can be the case here, because their absenteeism has always been measured. So I'm not sure if that bears up here. But if I've got that wrong, WL, please fill me in. All right, so Costas Con asks, has Transport for London now dumped the face-to-face resilience course in lieu of what you've now got, the e-learning course?
Oh, that's a good question, and that's true, they have. Yeah. Because the occupational health specialist, who I'm happy to disclose with people after if they're interested in pursuing this further, is no longer working with TfL at the moment. So that was a temporary kind of consultancy, and so this was a lasting imprint of the work that she had done, which is quite interesting, actually.
Ali asks a point. Ali's been presenteeism as well, where people stick around. Yes, and Con says, well done, major victory for e-learning. Yes, let's celebrate our successes. Congratulations, absolutely. Everybody wins in this one, don't they? You know, if you've travelled by train in London, if you're working there, everyone wins. It's fantastic. Ali says, would be interested to know how productivity was effective if presenteeism, presenteeism is when you just hang around for the sake of it, was reduced. It may follow that productivity would also increase. I don't know if you can possibly measure that. I mean, have you got any measures for that?
It's so tricky to measure. It's really hard to see exactly how productivity might be affected by the problem of presenteeism, and this really boils back down to those figures about employee engagement that we began with. We know there's a concrete difference in companies where a majority of the workforce is emotionally invested in the goals, and we know that because those organizations survive, because the average lifespan of a company is decreasing rapidly, and it's those organizations that actually survive. But going into the details of how we measure this it is difficult, and we are doing more work into that. And I should probably announce now that we're hoping next month to be issuing a white paper that summarises this case study and also looks at the broader context, and hopefully provides people with some more information and some guidelines as to how they might go about that process of beginning to measure the effect of mental health on their organisations.
Can you drop into the text chat area, one of you, to how people can get hold of that white paper when it comes out next month? That would be great. And Ruth, I love Ruth's point here, that this sort of ripple rather than splash effect is extremely significant and couldn't possibly have been achieved face-to-face without a massive investment of time and money. That's a really good point, Ruth. In fact, the only way you can have that sort of splash, a ripple versus a splash, is through some form of online course, and that's Ruth Gibbons. And that makes sense to you, Toby. I'm not sure I know who Ruth is. Guys, I've been talking. You should wrap up, then I can do the housekeeping and get everybody home.
Okay, great. And I can see that Nick's has put in the chat that we will be issuing our white paper that will go out on your Learning and Skills Group email when it's out, and of course we'll be tweeting about it as well. So I just want to kind of summarise with these key kind of points. And I've just seen the question as well, the date for release of that. Well, we're hoping by the end of next month it'll be ready to be released to the public. That business change is key to survival, change to the way culture works, change to the way processes work, but only emotionally invested employees can drive that change through. And so rather than just a return on investment as we've seen, learning needs to aim at a return on emotional investment in content in an organization, in learning outcomes. And this is our point. ROEL is very nice, isn't it? ROEI, sorry. But to achieve that, learning needs to change. And this really applies not just to e-learning, but to the whole range of tools we have at our disposal. It needs to be personalized and it needs to be action-orientated. And as we have seen, cultural change across an organization from the ripple, not the splash, as we've said, is the biggest and most important source that you have of real return on investment, not just cost savings, but a genuine return.
I think deserve to be vain. Well done.
And this course, by the way, was awarded by the Learning and Performance Institute Instructional Designer of the Year as well. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I am the chairman of the institute, but I should point out I do not have anything to do with the awards. So learning as a whole, fantastic. So thank you so much. And you're right, guys. It's not just about hash LS on Twitter. And yes, absolutely, everything will be available through the Learning and Skills. Sorry about that. Looks like there was a technical glitch. Hope you're all back with us now. You didn't miss much. I was just waffling. It's great to have had you with us. I want to say thank you to both Nick and Toby for a great presentation that really has, in Teresa's words, made us think more about L&D and emotional resilience generally, not just in relation to e-learning. So I think it's been an inspirational talk. The recording, the slides and the web chat will be available through learningandskillsgroup.com, possibly tomorrow, but certainly by Monday. And of course, this is part of an ongoing series of webinars. The next ones come up on the 3rd of October.